Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Rooted and Grounded podcast from the 109 Church of Christ. Thank you for being here and spending a little time with us. Wayne, Matt.
Glad to be here, man.
Good to be here.
Excited about today.
Yes. No, we are going someplace we have never gone before. That is the Old Testament.
Oh, man.
Yes,
All right.
if you are following along, get ready to. We're not telling you where we're going just yet. We'll do that in just a second. But one thing, guys, that I think all great stories have in common is a plot twist.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's a show or a movie or a book or even just a word of mouth story. And when we hear a story, we start trying to put the pieces in place and we try to figure out how it's going to end, who's going to do what. But the great ones have the unexpected twist, have the character developments that we just don't see coming, and it adds that excitement. And one of the things that I've gotten into and really have seen this a lot, and just to give you an idea of how cool and interesting of a guy I am in my free time, I have gotten into the presidents and reading presidential biographies and kind of learning American history from the lens of the presidency. And I think about a lot of the presidents like 1850 to 1900, like Lincoln and Grant and Garfield and some of these guys where there was no indication, there was no reason or way for any of them to make it to the high office, but yet through these miraculous seemingly twists and turns, they made it. But as we think about looking at the book with the greatest story ever told, there are a lot of really intriguing and really unexpected plot twists or plot developments that happen. And so what are some of your favorite plot twists in the Bible?
Oh, I would say one of mine, and even though it turned out to be bad for one fella,
Yeah.
but it was a plot, and you know
That usually does happen. Like
it does, doesn't it? And exactly for him. But in the book of Esther, I think about Mordecai, and I think about Haman and his dislike for Mordecai planning to hang him on the gallows, and it's turned out what a twist it was. He ended up being hanged himself, and you know, in the whole book of Esther, God said he was working through their lives, Mordecai and Esther, and it's no wonder it says for such a time as this. And Haman was so shocked and surprised.
Yeah, I actually think we're supposed to do an episode on that here in a couple of weeks. So,
That's
Good.
great.
yeah,
That'd be wonderful.
yeah, Matt,
I want to be Mordecai.
Matt, any plot twists that stand out to you?
I think about like Jonah.
Yeah.
I mean, swallowed by a big fish. I mean, I'm the guy. This is why the storm's here. You know, just what if, you know, even at the end, he loved to plant. You know, like
And then complained about
and
it.
then complained. I mean, just the twists and turns in that story are just, it's worth diving in and thinking about.
Yeah, and
It
then
catches your attention.
and then it kind of ends without an ending in a lot
And
of
then
ways.
you don't have an ending.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you, when he came out of that fish, son, he hit the shore running.
He said, y'all need to hear what I got to say.
but then he was disappointed when they listened
And
to
then
it.
he was mad because they listened. Yeah.
Because they didn't want to hear.
Yeah.
I didn't think they'd hear.
We will not be mad if people listen to this podcast.
Well, we hope
We
they do.
will be excited.
Yeah. Yes. All right. So I think, and where we're going today, probably the individual who had the most plot twist in their life has to be Joseph.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you think about everything that his life had, from favored child to captive to slave to servant to head of a house to prisoner to, I mean, just the story goes on and on and on without ever being able to figure out exactly how it's going to go and how it's going to end. And so we'll look at that today. And so if you're following along, our verse of focus is going to be Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. And that says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." But this is picking up really at the end of the story and of the story as a whole, but also in the middle of another story. And so let's read Genesis 50, 15 through 21, just to kind of set the scene for everybody and make sure we're on the same page, and then we'll start diving in. And so verse 15, it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you. And now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And so,
Wow.
like we said, this story is nothing
Man, I love this stuff.
but curves. And so Joseph obviously early on in his life was sold into slavery by his brothers. Once he becomes a high official in the land of Egypt, he is overseeing really the nation's preservation for the upcoming famine. And as the famine hits, Joseph's brothers make their way to Egypt, and we have this grand reunion that takes place. And now that Jacob has died, the brothers are fearful that it's time for retaliation. And I understand why they would have that fear.
Exactly.
But Joseph gives us a wonderful example on forgiveness and reconciliation. And in that, though, we see just a small glimpse of why Joseph is such an admirable figure. And so Matt, before we get kind of into the roots and the grounds, take just a couple of minutes and tell us why Joseph is so awesome.
Oh, man.
Couple of minutes.
Okay, here we go.
One more thing.
When I think about Joseph, I think about a young boy that gets a coat of many colors, and he has an ability, and he just, early on, even his dad's like, man, you need to hone it in a little bit, just the excitement of I think about my son, and it just seems like he's got favor all the time. I always tell him, man, you got favor just all over you. And, when he was young, things would fall in his lap, and things would, people would always give extra grace. And like Joseph, things would, he was loved because, Jacob, the way that he thought about him and the relationship with, his wife and all of that side backstory, he was a special guy to Jacob. Not that he didn't love his other sons. And his brothers hated his guts. And he almost was naive to that maybe at first. But I think that what you see in Joseph is in us so much as things progressed in his life and he was faced with situations as terrible of a job as Jacob did sometimes in his life. The one thing that Jacob did do, because we hear it here at the end, is Jacob taught Joseph who God is. And what I appreciate about all the twists and all the excitement and all the downward spiral and back up and again in the story is Joseph recognizes, and you hear glimmers of it in the story, but it really becomes, you really can see it here in that verse 20. He says, but God meant it for good. What? All the things for you to get sold into slavery, for you to be accused of, we're going to talk about all that, but all of it to be forgotten about, it's like God meant it for good. What? Well, and I think that after we discuss this, maybe you can have a better appreciation of of this idea of God's providence. And I know that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, because you do
I'm
see
excited
kind of
about
God at work here. I mean, you know, the word providence is not a biblical word, but it's a biblical concept. Because if you look up that word, it means to see ahead, you know, kind of like what we would say. It would say that you're seeing something out there, and that, of course, that's God. And it's so many times I think we talk about Joseph, we just think about Joseph. But listen, his life is a story about God.
Yep.
It's not just Joseph, because it was God that was working and seeing beforehand and to make the preparation so. Because there's no way Joseph could have done that on his own.
No.
He's a human.
Yep.
He didn't have that, you know, supernatural powers like we talked about a few episodes ago of being a model there, that you got extreme powers that others don't. No, he was a brother. He was a son, but he continued to seem to keep his eyes on God, and very difficult, undesirable twists and turns that happened in his life.
Yeah.
And so to me, when you look at Joseph, you're really talking about, it's a story about God's life, or God involved in his life, and that providence, providing, and the provisions were such that they was always there.
No, and very good points. And so, Wayne, kind of carry on from that thought and take us through the ground of this passage. What can we ground to from the story of Joseph in Genesis 50?
Oh man, this I wanted to be is just the fact that don't ever give up on God.
That's right.
There may be things in life that you don't understand. I mean, you don't, and you may even question. You know, how come? Why? And I know that's so common with people today, because well, is God? This is happening because I haven't been what God wanted me to be, and just remember, guys, that one of the grounds here is God is always for his people.
That's right.
Always. And, when those things happen in life, I was just talking to someone last week, and he said he's like a bulb. He was dealing with some difficulties. And he said, Wayne, what kind of finally came to me? The bulb came on, it lit. He said, I kept asking myself, when we'd talked several times, he said, I kept asking myself, why? Why me? Why my family? How come this is happening to us? And then he said, it finally hit me. Why not? Why not me? Why not us? Because I've learned through these things that my trust really needs to be deeper. Here's the ground that I want to build my life on. Here's a ground that I want to walk on, if you will. And that ground was, he said, I can continue on all these things. I've learned that God was there. And to me, that's one of the things that's so powerful in the life of Joseph, that God was always there.
I think about and I don't know if we could discuss this and toss this around a lot, but I think one of the interesting things about Joseph is early on he has that vision, right? And he's like, all y'all gonna bow down to me. And they're like, boy, you need to calm that thing down, bro.
Right.
Like, ain't nobody
Where'd
bowing
you get
down.
that?
Like, I don't know. Well, that coat ain't that nice. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's because we love you, not because we bowing down to you. But as time goes on and he has this, later on about the famine and all the things, it's almost like it starts clicking, and I want to just bring it into the conversation, and maybe just hold it till later on. But this is the equivalent of Romans chapter 8, verse 28.
Exactly.
It's all things work together for the good. And we know that he loved God, because he says when Potiphar's wife tries to do what she does, I'm not sinning against God. He makes that known. Well, where did that come from? Right. Because he is rooted and grounded in, and this makes me, this kind of does make me a little bit emotional thinking about it. God made a promise to Abraham, and Abraham told Isaac that promise. And Isaac told Jacob and Esau that promise. And Jacob carried that promise on to all his sons. And Joseph carried that promise on in his mind. He may have not declared it, But the reason why he followed that God was because he believed in the promise that God had made to his daddy.
Yeah.
Man.
And especially to be in a foreign land too, where God would not have been God. And
Exactly.
He would have been around the Egyptian deity of the time. And I don't know what the Jewish population there would have been, but he definitely would have been in the minority with his faith.
Yeah.
And
Big time.
And despite that, he was able to remain faithful in trials and remain faithful as a leader of the country.
And you're talking about something, I just want to touch this. We don't have time to dig into it. But just for our hearers and those who are watching today to think about in their own personal study, tie in Genesis 15 with that.
Yeah.
Verse 13 and 14. When God told Abraham,
That's right.
You're going to be in your people's going to be in a
They're
foreign land.
going to be in a foreign land.
They're going to be there.
Right.
Now, it's about 200 years later.
Right.
Okay? Now, about 200 years later, guys, we've said it before and we'll probably say it again. We are blessed to serve a promise-keeping God.
I can't help but think about that he didn't probably have the Bible like we got it. But Jacob, constantly was talking about all these types of things. What your granddaddy was told, like Isaac was the guy, those stories and those conversations were still talked about just like we talk about them. Right. But it brings them back. It's incredible to me that right now I can still think just like Jacob and Joseph thought about that statement. Yahweh is a promise-keeping God, and he will keep his promise. What he says will happen is going to happen, and what he says he'll do, he'll do.
And he's an amazing God when you think about this, guys. I mean, you think about God telling him, and then 200 years later, and look at all the amazing events that happened in those 200 years. Even the amazing events in Joseph's life.
Joseph had confidence like Paul had confidence.
That's right.
And it was because of one source. And it was the trust in God and who he is and what he can do. Right. Come on, man.
Well, and I think sticking on this promise theme, and you're looking at Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and it was Judah who carried the promise on. It was not Jacob, but what if Jacob was not in the picture?
That's right.
Does the promise continue?
That's right.
Even though he may not have been the vessel through which the lineage progressed.
Love it.
If Jacob wasn't in Egypt, then there is no family of Israel.
Yes.
And so God can use people to fulfill his promise, even if the promise may not necessarily impact them most specifically.
That's right.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
All right.
And Joseph, that hand of God, always there, always.
Yeah.
It just shows, man, there's layers on this. It's the idea of what Jesus said: seek first the kingdom and seek first my righteousness, and I got you.
Yeah.
Because the righteous way, think about what Joseph did. In all of the events, he was always trying to be what God would have him to be. Here he was, a friend to the cupbearer, right? Cupbearer forgets him.
What a friend.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. I know how I'd have been thinking about it if I finally got out. Really, there he is right there, and I'm the man now. You know what I'm saying?
We'll make
bear this cup, brother.
We'll make your memory come back.
Exactly. Remember this.
Exactly right. You're a forgetter. It won't work.
But he is just he reminds me, now that I'm thinking about this more, very much like a Paul. Very tested in trials, but very much under control in the moment. Unbelievable.
So Matt, what would you say the roots are for this passage?
Well, I'm thinking about just the ideas of what he went through. I think some roots that can come out of the story is, how do you treat people when they mistreat you? Like family. Like they threw him in the pit. If it wasn't for was it Reuben? If it wasn't for Reuben, they would have, they wanted him dead.
Right.
And then they went and lied to Jacob, and once he finds out all of this story, the way that he treats them when he didn't have to. He was the man.
Right.
Yeah.
And think
That's
about
a
the
root.
plot of his, you said, and they lied to their dad, but think about the thought that went into that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
Killing the animal, putting the blood on the coat, and then taking it back.
Yeah. Just the manipulation and the
yeah.
wrath and the just a lot
And trying
of
to get
qualities in
themselves
there.
out of
Well,
trouble.
and some of it that he exemplifies that we really don't get too many examples from in Scripture is his uncle Esau.
Yep.
Because when Jacob and Esau
Yep.
reunite,
Exactly.
Jacob is the brothers.
Exactly.
Yep.
And he's sending gifts and saying,
That's
please,
right.
please,
That's
please, don't kill me.
Absolutely.
And Esau says, we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything is good. You've been blessed. I've been blessed.
That's right.
We're good. And now fast forward maybe 50 years later, and we have Joseph taking the place of Esau and forgiving the brothers.
Well, and you think about even like when just another route, I think, when Joseph is put in power at Potiphar's house, the way he acts in that situation, when he becomes,
The man.
when he is the man, he acts very humble. And even when he goes to jail and he becomes the man again, it's like these glimpses of, and I think about that. See, this is why I love this story, because you see providence working. 2 times specifically, he becomes in power. He's not like all the way in power. He probably never could dream that he would be he'd be Pharaoh. I mean, basically, this guy's Pharaoh. But 2 times he's being like trained, so to speak. God has put him in a position to see how he would react and how he would handle it. And don't you think we all can attest to this? When we look back on our lives, it was like, oh, the Lord put me in that spot for me. He was training me, man.
So like, well, let's think about Joseph in prison. Do you think his mindset was more, why me? What am I doing? Or do you think it was it's just a matter of time?
Maybe both.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
He had to.
'Cause
Paul probably had to too.
Right. And
Because
but I
he's
don't-
human.
But when I look at Genesis 45, guys, and I know
I love that
this
thought,
whole
man.
concept goes all the way back. I mean, there's 13 chapters that we're trying to cover in a
Right.
few minutes here. I mean, there's more given in the book of Genesis. We've got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob,
And Joseph.
and then Joseph has 13 chapters about
It's what
God
Matt
working
said,
in
like,
his life.
Yeah, Joseph is setting up for the promise.
Exactly.
He's just a piece of the puzzle,
But
man.
it seems to me, Matt, when you bring that up, what was his mentality? And seriously, the first thing that hit me when you asked was, it was roller coaster.
Yeah.
There was times he'd be on the mountaintop. It's just a matter of time, man. It's just a matter of time because God is good.
God's good.
God is working.
He's a promise.
And then there's another time, well, how much longer?
Yeah.
How much longer I got to wait, man, before he shows up or before he does it? But we won't take time to read it, but I would encourage our readers to look at Genesis 45, verses 5 through 8, because he says, God sent me before you to preserve life.
That's right.
I don't know, but it seems to me that's when he got it.
Yeah.
That was one of those mountaintop moments when he says that I've been in this land for 2 years, and you guys think it's bad right now? Y'all are having to come and beg for food. Let me just tell you a little secret. We've been preparing for this. And there's 5 more years of this, guys. We hadn't seen the worst yet.
Well, verse 8, he
Yeah.
says, now therefore it was not you who sent me here,
Exactly.
but God.
A
God
matter of
put me
time.
on that wagon and sent me there.
Matter of time. He'll come.
Yeah.
Like,
He'll deliver it.
people say this all the time, and I mean, I've been that guy too, praying for patience. But the idea is sometimes you pray for that because here we go back to a previous episode. Learning to be content in the moment and learning to know that God is still with me even in this time creates a different type of atmosphere later on. I mean, it almost seems like he becomes bolder and bolder, and by the time he steps into the Pharaoh spot, he's like, he's ready.
Yeah, you talking about that praying for patience? A buddy of mine says you have to be careful because he was praying for patience. His mother-in-law moved in with him. He said, you better be careful.
No comment.
what you pray for.
No comment.
All right, guys. Sticking with the no comment thing. Let's just make it real.
I sure do love my mother-in-law.
Me too.
Oh, me too.
You too.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm
Matt,
not saying he didn't.
all right, Matt, make it real for us.
Oh, man.
It's time to make
Already?
it real, man. What?
Wow.
This is great. I'm already out of time. All right, here we go. Oh, man. Maybe verses 18 and 19 for me in Genesis 50. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place?" When he had the moment to do whatever he wanted to do, he had the power. Mm-hmm. I mean, nobody was going to, I mean, Pharaoh said, "Do whatever you want." Mm-hmm. He said, I mean, you guys, you did mean evil against me. Mm-hmm. I mean, y'all did. Mm-hmm. But God meant it for good. And listen to this. Mm-hmm. In order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. Mm-hmm. He hung on, I think this is the biggest point. He hung on the promise of God. Mm-hmm. He hung on it, that I'm a part of it. And as much as we can say, well, that's not me that's involved in this, and, you know, maybe somebody else has a better, more important, that's just not true. Like, we all play a role and play a part in furthering the kingdom. Mm-hmm. And that's awesome. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, that's good.
Good thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wayne?
You know, I'd just go back to Genesis 41 when the two sons were born and what he named them. He says, Joseph, in 51 there of chapter 41, Joseph's called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. God has made me forget. Yeah. All my hardship, but then the name of the second Ephraim, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. It's interesting that in both of those times he says, but God.
But God.
He continued to look at him and, you know, go along, Matt, and just making it real. One of the things that always stood out to me about Joseph that made him such a wonderful character that's worthy of our study and emulation in a lot, or forgiveness, reconciliation, was how he handled the success. Yeah. You know, sometimes it's overcoming the trial of adversity is one thing. And a lot of times we don't talk about and think about overcoming the trial of success can be challenging. Mm-hmm. And when he had that power, he handled it in such a wonderful way. Kind of like God does with us.
Yes.
Very true.
Oh, man.
And so I would say mine is to be unselfish in suffering. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times when we suffer, it's easy to have the why me mindset or when will things get better for me. But Joseph realized that God was able to use him, like we've talked about, to keep a lot of other people alive. And so maybe the isolation of our suffering should produce an inclusive blessing of where we may have to go through the suffering and we may, to some degree, be suffering alone while others can help and support. We may be the one that's suffering, but from that suffering, from the pit, from the slavery, from the prison cell, getting to the place where the blessings are for all. In Joseph's case, he saved a nation, he saved a family, he helped lead to the creation of another nation. But despite his suffering, he was able to use it for an inclusive blessing.
Love stuff, man. It's
good word, bro.
Yeah. Great.
All right, well, guys, it's been a very fast
this
episode.
Over, man.
We'll have to do some more on Joseph as we go on.
Yeah, that's good.
But great discussion as always. And again, for those of you listening and watching, thank you for taking the time to do that. And we hope it's been a blessing for you. And we'll do it again soon. Take care.